Hello and welcome back to Supposedly Fun. My name is Greg. I am here to do my Friday Reads video where I wrap up the week in reading and talk about bookish things and anything else that has been going on during the week. And what a week it has been. A lot has happened, and I know a lot of people have been struggling with reading. I've heard from a couple of them this week. So if you are as well, totally understandable. The world is in crisis right now, and who knows where it's going to land. And not only is the world in crisis outside of the United States, there have been a lot of things that have happened inside the United States this week that have been stressful. The first one I want to mention is that Governor Abbott in Texas announced that he is basically criminalizing transitional care for transgender kids who are underage. He will label it as child abuse and is asking educators to report parents and parents of transgender students and transgender students themselves. It is really a gross thing. Hopefully I don't have to explain to you why, but in light of the conversation I was having last week about banned books inspired by Brian over at Bookish, and I'll put a link to my video about banned books in the description box down below. This is really an extension of that conversation and how it's awful that people think that they can regulate what other people can and cannot do with their bodies and just will not understand. It really upsets me. The reason I want to bring it up, aside from the fact that it is gross, and I think it's important to reach out. Like, I'm worried that something like this is going to come to Montana, not going to lie. So I am going to be spending some time this weekend using ResistBot to contact my government and try to tell them that I don't want anything like that to happen here. The other thing is that Montana Book Company started a fundraiser on Bonfire. They are selling t-shirts that say protect trans kids and then have the Montana Book Company logo on them. It is 100% a fundraiser for the Transgender Law Center. Montana Book Company does not take any of the money that come from these sales. So I intend to purchase, I believe Joel and I are going to purchase a t-shirt and a long sleeve shirt this weekend. Joel has been traveling, so when he gets home today, we're going to look and make an actual purchase. Plus today, Friday, the day I'm filming this, is payday, so that's always good. If you are unfamiliar, the Transgender Law Center is the largest national trans-led organization advocating for a world in which all people are free to define themselves and their futures. Grounded in legal expertise and committed to racial justice, Transgender Law Center employs a variety of community-driven strategies to keep transgender and gender non-conforming people alive, thriving, and fighting for liberation. So, a really good cause. Please check it out. I'll put a link to this Bonfire campaign in the description box down below. Again, I'm definitely going to be buying at least one t-shirt this weekend and probably two. I think there's also a hoodie, but I think we're probably going to do a t-shirt and a long-sleeved tee. So please think about supporting that campaign. I've also shared that information on Instagram and on Twitter. If you are not going to purchase yourself, consider sharing it and amplifying it to help them do this fundraiser and protect transgender kids, because it's a lot. And the world is a lot right now. There's, it feels odd trying to go about your daily business and working while the world is on fire. And who knows what's going to happen with Russia and Ukraine right now. It feels odd reading. I did dive back into comfort reading on the side. It was essential for me this week. So I just kind of want to put that out there as well. If your reading has suffered this week, if you have been struggling to get through some other things, the world is a lot right now. The news is very stressful, so that is okay. And if you've been able to hide away from the stress and the tension in reading or movies or whatever, good for you. That is kind of what I tried to do this week and succeeded to some level of success. And we'll get to the Friday Reads portion. I did finish a book this week, and I was excited about that. The other thing I wanted to talk about this week is that we finished season 2 of Pose. I mentioned last week that we had started it, And season 3 is not streaming anywhere at the moment, so we are probably just going to purchase season 3 rather than wait for it to show up, because we want to finish. And also, we've been enjoying this show enough that, why not throw some support the way of the creators and help them as well. It is a really interesting show. If you're unfamiliar, it is set in the first season is set in the late 80s, and then the second season is 1990 and 1991, and then I believe the third season jumps to 1994, and it is set within the ball world, which is something that not a lot of people, even within the LGBTQ community, know about, because they were never quite mainstream. The second season deals with the fact that Madonna's Vogue song and music video kind of co-opted things from the ball scene, and how they thought they were going to gain national attention, and then they didn't off of that. So it's a really interesting show about people who have been on the margins of the LGBTQ community and AIDS, and it just gets you right in the heart. And it also talks about family and chosen family and parenthood, and it's interesting because watching the show about the house mother, it reminds me of what I had thought being a foster parent would be like, and the reality was much more difficult, and maybe not quite the result that Blanca gets in Pose, but it's a really great show. If you have not watched it, I would definitely recommend checking it out. We also managed to get to the movies on Sunday. We saw Death on the Nile. Since we got COVID in January, we are trying to use this little window now that we are recovered to get out and see movies and experience the world a little more and feel a little bit safer. But we are still adopting a safety policy where we look into Sunday night movies because they're much less crowded. And we kind of watch to see if the theater is relatively empty. And if it is, then we will go to see the movie. And it's been nice. So we managed to see Spider-Man. We saw Death on the Nile, and something that I am completely forgetting. So maybe that just tells you something about the movie. I don't know. But it was nice to get out, and that movie ties in with the Friday Reads portion of this video. So let's go into the Friday Reads portion of this, because I had mentioned last week that I was thinking of picking up a book on the site. Actually, let's do that first. I'm all out of order. I mentioned that I was probably going to pick up The Wrong End of the Telescope by Rabih Alameddine on the side because it's a library book. But with everything going on in the world, I was feeling a little too stressed out and needed something that was going to be a little bit more escapist. And, a book about refugees probably wasn't going to do that for me. So I only managed to read 2 pages of this before I decided, before I even get very far in, I need something that's going to take me to a different headspace. Because the other book that I am reading is Beloved. And I'm loving Beloved, but it is an emotional read. So I needed escapist. And I had mentioned The Book Boyfriend by Chris Ripper, which I had access to. But instead, because we were going to go see Death on the Nile, I picked that up because I have a copy, this older vintage-ish looking edition of it that I purchased, I think, last year for $1. And here it is. I just picked it up and worked my way through it over the week. It's a short book. It's barely over 200 pages, but it took me all week to finish it. I started it on Saturday and only finished it last night. And last night I actually put a big push on it and got a lot of it done. I think I read over 50 pages, probably more like 75 last night in order to finish it. With everything going on in the world, I'm okay with it. If I needed to work my way through something a little more slowly and make that something was a little bit more escapist, I'm totally fine with it. It's good. Agatha Christie is someone I have a really unique and interesting relationship with because I enjoy the style of mystery that she writes. I prefer the Miss Marple books, but it feels like more people are into Hercule Poirot. And some of her books almost infuriate me. Like, I actually really do not like Murder on the Orient Express, which is one of her more famous books. And part of why I don't like that, and part of why I don't like Hercule Poirot, is that in Murder on the Orient Express, he takes these wild logical leaps that make him look like a genius, because they all end up being accurate, of course. But how he gets from point A to point B is wild, and there's no way you could reach that conclusion on your own reasonably. And this book, for the most part, doesn't have that. It's interesting. Part of me is thinking about doing a book-to-movie comparison, but I don't really want to do that. The movie is very different. So in the book, there's a cast of characters that kind of relate to the central couple and the murder victim of the book. But in the book, there are a lot of the relationships are sort of tangential. There are a lot of people who are on this boat on the Nile that don't actually have any relationship or tie back to the victim. And there are some that are teased out over the course of the book. But when you watch the movie, they've altered a lot of the characters, and in ways that will make them have a relationship with the ultimate murder victim. And the reason they do that, of course, is that in the movie, everyone on the boat is a suspect, and everyone on the boat has a motive to commit murder. In the book, that is not the case. And I kind of prefer the book's low-key approach to that. But the book is a little more complicated because there are actually 3 different mysteries in it. And one of them is completely superfluous to the plot, and it has that same thing that I really dislike about the Poirot books. And in fact, the solution to one of the 3 mysteries is kind of infuriating, because you don't have the information needed to figure out what's going on with it. At the very end, Hercule Poirot pulls out information that he had gained in the months before getting on this boat that you did not have access to. At no point in the plot did anybody mention this or refer to it, and he never conveyed that information to you. He just whips it out at the end and says, "This is how I solved this." And it's like, dude. So anyway, but it's also interesting to have that complaint, because this is the first time I have read an Agatha Christie book and solved it. Now, I picked this book up on Saturday. I think I got 50 pages in, and then we saw the movie on Sunday. So I think at the time we saw the movie, I was about 75 pages in. The murder doesn't happen until halfway through the book, but that's not a spoiler, because she does a lot of setup in the book. So by the time I saw the movie, I already had suspicions about who the culprit was, and turned out to be right. So it's the first time I actually solved an Agatha Christie book. So it feels weird to complain that in one of the storylines, they don't give you the information you need to do it, because I cracked it for the first time ever. But I'd be interested. And I'm not trying not to spoil anything about it. I'm not even going to mention who the murder victim is, because going into this book, I was wrong. Of course, I read the back of the book before I started it and realized that from the trailers for the movie, I was wrong about who the murder victim was. And I shall say no more about that. So it was fine. Mostly, this just helped me escape from thinking about what was going on in the world at large. Like all Agatha Christie books, there are occasionally comments that are problematic. In fact, the fact that this book is set in Egypt and was written in, I believe, the 1930s. I'm just going to quickly try to see if there's a copyright in here. The printing history starts in 1938, so let's go with that. The way some of the passengers talk about the Egyptian people around them is not great. So the book is very dated from that perspective. But, you know, your mileage may vary on this book. I have a weird history with Agatha Christie. I'm kind of all over the map, but I do appreciate the style of mystery that she does. So I was able to go along with it for that. I'm thinking if I do another Agatha Christie anytime soon, and I probably won't, because I have been leaning away from mystery thrillers a lot. So if I'm going to pick up another one, I probably would just go back to Sue Grafton. But I would probably go back to Miss Marple and not do Poirot, because the last two Christie books that I've read were Poirot books. And like I said, those are not the ones that I tend to enjoy. So it was fine. It did exactly what I needed it to do. And that is where I will leave it for Death on the Nile. In terms of Beloved, so as I mentioned, I have been talking about, this is something that I have been reading with Amelia Reeds, who is a commenter during the month of February. We had both really wanted to read Beloved. She had actually tried to start it about a year or 2 years ago and wanted to try again. We did a buddy read of Song of Solomon back in 2020, and it was my favorite read of the year. And I have always wanted to get to Beloved. This will be for my Pulitzer Prize project. We're almost done. We have, I think, less than 50 pages left. We had a couple of little struggles here and there during the week because of the news and just slowing down, but we are on track to be done by the end of February. So hopefully I will have this done by the next time we do a Friday Reads. And I'm really looking forward to talking about it. This is a very tremendous book. It's a very difficult book, but it is a very deliberately difficult book. Everything that Toni Morrison is doing in here is kind of like poking a bruise. But the way she's doing it is like she's poking a bruise that people are trying to ignore and shouldn't be. So it's a very urgent book. It's a very essential book, but it's not a pleasant book to read at all because it's very emotionally draining. It is deliberately difficult in a lot of ways. You have to be an active reader with this book, as you have to be with a lot of Toni Morrison's work. And I think the fact that it can be such a difficult book is probably where I do see a lot of people mention other Toni Morrison books as their favorite of hers. So I think that's probably why this is a very deliberately difficult book, but in a way that I think makes it very urgent and revelatory and beautiful. It's just a hard read, especially when there's a lot going on in the world. And I'll have more to say about it once I finish. Because this is a Pulitzer Prize winner for fiction, I'll be doing a specific video where I talk about this book. I have to do my Gone with the Wind one first. I'm really not looking forward to that. Part of the reason I'm really not looking forward to that is I feel like I said everything I need to say or wanted to say about Gone with the Wind, and I just don't want to talk about it anymore because there was a lot of pushback from people about what I got out of Gone with the Wind. There were a lot of people who understood and got it, but there were enough people that it was just giving me a headache, and I am hesitant to dive back into those waters. But Beloved is a really interesting book to do as a follow-up to Gone with the Wind for my Pulitzer Prize project, because it is very much about everything that Gone with the Wind is deliberately trying to erase from the historical record. So there will be a lot more to say about this once I finish. So those are the two physical books that I read this week. One finished, one almost done, and the next one I pick up is probably going to be The Wrong End of the Telescope after all, just because it is a library book and I will need to get it back. I was able to renew it, so it's not due until I think March 11th, so I have a little bit of time, but I want to read it and I am going to try to get it in. I might do The Book Boyfriend by Chris Ripper this weekend just to continue the sort of escapist trend. And, you know, the last part of Beloved has been particularly heavy. So I think the Book Boyfriend is something that I'm particularly going to be needing in my emotional life to try to sustain myself through a lot of other reading. It will probably be very good for that. And then I will get to The Wrong End of the Telescope. We'll see how that goes. In terms of audio, interesting things to report because I have nothing to report. I didn't pick up The Love Songs of W.E.B. Du Bois by Honorée Fannone Jeffers at all. And this is not a reflection on the book. The book was very good, and I was really enjoying Honorée Fannone Jeffers' writing. Something is going on with my reading habits. I am just not really into listening to books this year. And that's not just books or audiobooks, actually. It is also podcasts. I keep falling behind on podcasts as well. So this is a very big departure from me because for the last 2 years at a minimum, audiobooks have been the primary way I read books. And so far in 2022, I have only done one complete audiobook, and I finished an audiobook that I had started in 2021, and that was in the first week of January. Both of those were in the first week of January. Since then, I have been doing the exact same audiobook and not making much progress. In fact, I had to start it over when I didn't listen to it for 3 weeks. So, and again, not a comment on the book. I'm really enjoying the book. It just, something is going on with my reading habits, and I don't know what it means. I don't know what's causing it, but I am really getting more fulfillment out of physical books at the moment. And I'm just kind of leaning into that and going with that. And hopefully I'll be in more of a headspace for audiobooks. We'll see. It's not something you can really force yourself to do, because I've tried to force myself to listen to audio and podcasts, and it's just not quite taking. So I don't know what's going on with that. We'll have to see how it plays out over the next month and over the course of the year. Maybe this is going to be a year where I spend a lot more time with physical books. I'm okay with that if that's the way it's going to be. It's just a huge change. And it might mean that I need to rethink the way I approach some things that I want to read, because I do really want to read the love songs of W.E.B. Du Bois. But if I'm not going to be very into audio, then maybe that's the wrong type of book to try to force myself to do, because it is very long. So maybe I need to get myself on the hold list at the library for it, or think about picking up a copy of the book somehow. I don't know. I don't have an answer for that, but we'll see how that goes and how it develops. There are a lot of audiobooks that I had planned to follow up on once I got through the love songs of W.E.B. Du Bois. So I don't know what's going to happen, but we'll see. It's like when you get into a reading slump, you can't really force your way out of it. You kind of just have to let it play out. And this is not a reading slump, but whatever's going on with me and listening to audiobooks and podcasts is just going to have to play itself out, and I'll see it. If I need to listen to less audiobooks and transition back to physical books, maybe that's what it will be. And actually, I wonder if the success I had with the 2 e-galleys that I read, I believe it was 2, possibly more this year, is cutting in as well, because maybe it just primed something in me where I'm back in enjoying physical books. And that maybe the success that I had reading physical books in January is also sparking, because that's the way I've traditionally read. I don't know. I'm just spitballing right now, being an armchair psychologist for myself. So we'll see what happens with that. As always, I would love to hear what you've been up to this week. It has been extremely cold where I live, which is kind of infuriating, because every day it's beautiful and the sun is out, and yet it's freezing and you don't want to go outside. And I can't really take the dogs outside because it's just too cold, and Guinness starts to cough and we don't want to expose him to too much of the cold. So we're all cooped up in the house right now. And yet it's beautiful outside. Like, if it's going to be this cold, it should just snow at a certain point. So that's what we've been dealing with. I'd love to hear what your week has been like. If you've been struggling with everything going on, that is totally, totally fine and a valid experience of the world. If you're managing to carry on, that is also valid and good for you. So let me know what you've been up to, reading, watching, whatever, in the comment section down below. And as always, I really appreciate your time. I will be back. Until next time, happy reading.